Hi students, for tonight you are going to write the introduction to your war essay. In order to do that, what you'll need to have up is your war essay outline. I would like if you could type your paragraphs directly into the outline. If you would prefer to do it in a separate document, that's more than fine, but for the purposes of the video, I'm going to show it as being written into the outline itself. So if you take a look at the outline, your introduction needs to have a hook, a background, and a thesis. That does not mean that your introduction is going to be 3 sentences. Your introduction should be many more sentences than that, at least 5, if not 6 or 7 or even 8. So let's talk about which goes into each part of your introduction. For your hook, you can open up your essay with either a narrative, a current event, or an interesting historical fact. Let's talk about what each of those mean. So a narrative is when you open up with some kind of story. It could be a real life story from your life, from the life of someone you know, or a hypothetical story that you use to make a point. A current event would be something from the news today or the recent news. If you pick a current event, just as if you pick a narrative, you need to make sure that these two things, whichever one you use, relates to the topic of your essay. So make sure that you're not just picking something that seems interesting. It needs to be interesting and related to your topic. If you don't like either of those, you can also use an interesting historical fact. Again, the interesting historical fact needs to relate to the topic of your essay. So I'm now going to type an example of a hook that I might use if I was writing an essay on World War I. I'm going to use World War I because we learned a great deal about it in class and therefore everyone should be able to follow along. Now for my hook, I'm going to select the narrative option. But before I do that, some examples of current events I could use are wars that are currently happening in the world around us. And I can use that current event to then talk about a war in the past. If I was going to do historical information, I could pick out an interesting fact about my war that would grab my reader's attention. However, I'm going to use a narrative opening because I think it's the best option for what I want to do. Here is the example of my hook, right here. So let's take a look at what I've done for my hook. I wrote, World War I has been the topic of numerous television shows and movies, including Downton Abbey, Fly Boys, A Very Long Engagement, and Legend of the Fall. These depictions of World War I have featured famous actors and actresses, ranging from Hugh Bonneville to even Brad Pitt. However, one of the most haunting portrayals of World War I occurs in the novel All Quiet on the Western Front. In this novel, the young German recruit Paul undergoes horrific events during the war, including trench warfare, gas attacks, the alienation of his family, the death of his comrades, and eventually his own death. So you can see in my hook, I have a ton of information, and I try to make the information as interesting as possible to grab my reader's attention. I even go as far as to mention Brad Pitt, which is a pretty identifiable name, and also the show Downton Abbey, in hopes that it will bring my readers into my essay, because they might think, oh, I love that show, and oh, I love that actor. Then I relate it to something that I know very well, which is the novel All Quiet on the Western Front. And I then go and I get into the narrative aspect of my hook, which I describe how the book goes, how its plot unfolds. So actually, I kind of have the combination of 2 aspects of a hook. I have current events, which includes the television, and then I have the narrative, where I talk about what happens in the book. So this is the kind of thing that you want to do for your hook. Open up with something that's interesting, that relates to the topic of your essay, and that you know a good deal about. And if you don't know anything about what you want to write on, you should go and do some more research and find an interesting story, event, or historical fact relating to your topic that you can elaborate upon. So now that we've completed the sample hook, let's move to the background. With the background, you want to share the background information on the war that you selected. This includes the who, what, where, when, why, and how. While you won't have all of these aspects in your background, you should try to have as many as possible. So let's go and write a sample background. So let's take a look at the background. My background reads, the narrative look that the novel takes into World War I is entirely accurate. Beginning in 1914, World War I lasted 4 years, ending in 1918. It involved 32 countries with Germany, Russia, France, England, and Italy playing the biggest roles. While the war began with a conflict between only 2 countries, Austro-Hungary and Serbia, it spiraled out of control due to a set of defense alliances. So with the background, it does some important things. First, it starts with a transition that links what my hook was about to what my background is about. If you go straight from your hook to your background, your introduction will feel choppy and disjointed, and it really won't make sense when read together. So you want to make sure that you connect the two. So I mentioned that the narrative look that I just described is an accurate portrayal of World War I, which I am then going to describe. You can literally see it as a connector piece between the two parts. Mentions the narrative and then transitions to World War I. Then I get into my who, what, where, when, why, how. So beginning in 1914 and ending in 1918, when it involved 32 countries, Germany, Russia, France, Italy, England, and Italy. That's the who and where. And then it started as a conflict between 2 countries, how, and then it spiraled out of control due to a set of defense alliances. Why? So you can see that it hits on a couple of the who, what, where, when, why, hows, but not all of them, just the major ones that I need to convey the most important facts about World War I. So make sure that your background does these things. Again, notice my background is not one sentence. One sentence is not enough. It is several sentences because that's how long it took me to convey all the information that I needed to. So next, let's go to the thesis. With your thesis, you should have already written it in your outline. However, I'm going to go over the thesis anyway, just in case that you need some help with it. Here's the sample thesis. So my thesis reads, many believe that World War I was necessary. They claim that Germany forced countries to enter World War I by aggressively seeking out power. However, the horrendous outcomes of the Great War necessitates that countries should have resolved the issue using diplomatic means. So let's take a look at this thesis. Again, at the beginning of my thesis, something very important happens. There is a transition. I'm going from describing the war to talking about my position as a writer. So I create a transition that shows that I'm going to start talking about opinions. So I say, many believe that World War I was necessary. Again, we see the connector pieces. It talks about World War I and then about the concept of it being necessary or not. Here I talked about World War I, and here I'm talking about necessity. You can see the words linking, making this a connector piece between the two sections. Then I state my opposition. They, my opposition, claim, which means that I don't really believe them, that Germany forced countries to enter World War I by aggressively seeking out power. So I specifically state what it is that my opposition believes. I'm not vague here. I know what I'm talking about. So make sure that you know what you're talking about as well. Then I put my position. I use this word, however, which means that I am disagreeing with what my opposition said. So I say, however, the horrendous outcomes of the Great War necessitates that countries should have resolved the issue using joint diplomatic means. So I say, however, and then I state my position clearly and specifically. And I state that World War I, the outcomes were so terrible that there had to be another way to solve the problems that the war resulted from. So this is how you want to do your introduction. You want to have your hook, your background, and your thesis. Now mine ended up pretty long. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sentences. That probably should be the maximum of how long your introduction is. It really shouldn't be any longer than 10 sentences. However, that being said, it also shouldn't be any shorter than 5 sentences. So please shoot between 5 and 10 sentences for your introduction. And more importantly than worrying about the number of sentences, just make sure that you're saying everything that you need to say. Don't rush through this essay. Make sure that you're providing interesting information, that you're using your transitions, that you're providing factual information, that you're using your transitions, and that you clearly state the position of your opposition and yourself. All right, so that's how you're going to write your introduction. If you need to see this outside of the video, if you go back to the original link in Moodle, where I originally posted the war essay outline template, you can see this because it will be there. All right, good luck, and I look forward to reading your introductions.